1872. The land did not speak, but it remembered. Every morning, Eliza Hartwell stepped onto the wide wooden veranda and looked across the full stretch of her 2,000 acres, not with wonder, but with quiet calculation. Where others saw open prairie, she saw divisions, elevations, wind directions, and distances measured in both miles and decisions. The land had been her husband's dream. Now it was her responsibility. At 31, Eliza carried herself with a composure that unsettled most people who met her. She spoke precisely, listened more than she revealed, and kept her emotions contained behind a stillness that could easily be mistaken for detachment. In truth, it was discipline. The kind she had learned long before the frontier, raised among polished halls and structured expectations, where words mattered more than volume and presence mattered more than force. But the frontier was different. Out here, silence had weight, and for 18 months Eliza had carried it alone. Her husband, Daniel Hartwell, had not been reckless nor careless. His death had come not from violence or misfortune easily blamed, but from a chain of small failures, a stampede that should have been prevented, a delay that should not have occurred, a moment that could not be undone. What remained was not just grief, but unfinished intention. Daniel had believed this land would one day matter, not for cattle, not for crops, but for connection. Eliza did not fully understand his vision at first, but she had kept his records. Every ledger, every marked map, every note written in the margins with hurried certainty. Over time, patterns began to reveal themselves, not loudly but persistently. Trade routes shifting westward, new settlements appearing where there had been none, rumors of expansion, of tracks, of movement. The land was not isolated. It was waiting. That was why she stayed, despite the offers, despite the warnings, despite the way people in the nearest town spoke of her in lowered voices, as though independence in a woman required explanation. You cannot manage that land forever. You'll be forced to sell eventually. It's only a matter of time. Eliza never argued, she simply continued. Her days were structured with quiet precision. Mornings for correspondence, letters written in careful script to suppliers, traders, and officials. Afternoons for reviewing land boundaries and records. Evenings for observation, watching how the light moved across her property, noting what changed and what did not. It was during those observations that she first noticed the irregularities. At first, they were easy to dismiss. A delivery that arrived late, a shipment that never came. A response to a letter that felt incomplete. But then the patterns deepened. Suppliers who had worked with her husband for years began withdrawing without clear reason. Agreements dissolved not with confrontation, but with absence. Routes that once brought wagons near her land shifted slightly, just enough to exclude her, not enough to justify complaint. It was not chaos, it was precision, and precision meant intent. Eliza adjusted accordingly. She rewrote contracts, sought new contacts, and adapted her operations. But each adjustment seemed to meet a new obstacle, subtle, controlled, and always just beyond proof. No threats were made. No names were spoken, yet the message was clear. She was being guided toward an outcome, one she had not chosen. Still, she did not yield. Because yielding would mean admitting that the land was only what others decided it to be. And Eliza Hartwell did not believe in borrowed definitions. The evening the writer arrived, the sky held no warning. The air was still, the horizon unbroken, the quiet unchanged. Eliza had just finished sealing a letter when she heard it, not loudly but distinctly. The distant rhythm of hooves approaching her gate. Visitors were rare, unexpected ones even more so. She stepped outside, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. From the edge of the property line, a single rider approached at an unhurried pace. His horse moved with the ease of long travel, neither rushed nor reluctant. When he reached the gate, he did not call out immediately. He waited. That more than anything caught her attention. Most men announced themselves. This one observed first. "Eliza Hartwell?" he asked after a moment, his voice even. "Yes." He nodded once as though confirming something already assumed. "Caleb Rowe." He did not offer more, no explanation, no story, just a name. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance at first glance. Dust from travel, a coat worn but maintained, a revolver at his side that remained untouched. But his stillness suggested something else. Not caution, not fear, awareness. "What do you want, Mr. Rowe?" Eliza asked. "A place to rest," he replied, "just for a short while." There was no urgency in his tone, no attempt to persuade. It was a simple request offered without expectation. Eliza studied him carefully, not his clothing nor his posture, but the space between his words. What he chose not to say. "Why here?" she asked. Caleb glanced past her toward the land stretching behind the house. "Because you haven't left," he said. The answer was unexpected, not flattering, not evasive, just accurate. Something in that response shifted her decision. "You may stay the night," she said. "Nothing more is promised." "That's enough," he replied. He did not ask questions that evening. He accepted a meal without comment, spoke only when necessary, and listened more than he revealed. It was not politeness, it was restraint. The kind that came from habit, not performance. Eliza noticed everything. The way his eyes moved, not aimlessly, but with purpose. The way he paused before answering, as though measuring consequences. The way he seemed to take in the structure of the house, the placement of objects, the organization of her work. He was not simply resting. He was observing. Later, after the lamps were dimmed and the house settled into its familiar quiet, Eliza returned to her study. The maps remained spread across her desk, weighted at the corners, marked with careful notes. She paused when she noticed something different. One of the maps shifted slightly, not misplaced, adjusted, a small detail, but intentional. Eliza did not react immediately. Instead, she looked closer. A faint pencil mark had been added near the western boundary, a line she had overlooked, not incorrect, not disruptive, but significant. She heard footsteps behind her. Caleb stood at the doorway, not entering, not retreating. "You're mapping trade movement," he said quietly. It was not a question. Eliza turned slowly, her gaze steady. "And you recognize it," she replied. A brief silence passed between them, then Caleb nodded. "Yes." In that moment something changed, not dramatically, not visibly, but undeniably. For 18 months, Eliza Hartwell had carried the weight of understanding alone, half-formed, incomplete, and constantly resisted. Now, standing in the doorway of her study was someone who saw the same land and understood what it could become. The silence of ownership had been broken, not by force, but by recognition. The following morning did not begin with questions. It began with quiet observation. Eliza rose before sunrise, as she always did, expecting to find her routines undisturbed. Yet something subtle had shifted, not in the land, but in the atmosphere of the house itself. It was no longer defined solely by her presence. There was another mind within it now, one that did not intrude, yet did not disappear either. Caleb Rowe was already awake. She found him seated at the far end of the veranda, not idle, but studying the horizon with the same still patience he had shown the night before. He did not greet her immediately. Instead, he seemed to be measuring distance, between hills, between roots, between possibilities. "You're not just passing through," Eliza said, breaking the quiet. Caleb turned slightly, acknowledging her without surprise. "No," he said, "I don't believe I am." There was no hesitation in his answer this time. Eliza stepped beside him, following his gaze outward. "What do you see?" she asked. Caleb considered the question carefully, as though the answer required precision. "I see land others believe is isolated," he said. "And I see how close it is to becoming essential." Eliza did not respond immediately. Instead, she studied him not for deception, but for alignment. "Then you understand why it's being redirected," she said. Caleb nodded once. Yes, their work together did not begin as an agreement. It emerged gradually. Eliza continued her routines, and Caleb moved within them, not replacing, not interrupting, but refining. He did not touch anything without purpose. He did not offer suggestions without certainty. It was not long before patterns began to surface more clearly. The missing supplies were not random. They followed a sequence. Each delay corresponded with a shift in regional trade movement. Routes that once intersected near Eliza's land were being adjusted, not away entirely, but just enough to weaken her position over time. It was careful work, designed to avoid notice. Designed to appear natural, but it was neither. "It's not sabotage," Eliza said one afternoon as they reviewed her records together. "No," Caleb replied, "it's repositioning." The word lingered between them. Repositioning meant patience. Repositioning meant planning. Repositioning meant someone was thinking far beyond immediate gain. Eliza folded her hands over the ledger. "They're not trying to take the land directly," she said. "They're trying to make it irrelevant." Caleb glanced at her, a faint recognition in his expression. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what they're doing." Days passed without urgency, yet with growing clarity. Caleb began tracing connections, not through confrontation, but through alignment of detail. He mapped where supply lines had shifted, where correspondence had stalled, where influence seemed to extend quietly. Eliza, in turn, provided what he needed: records, letters, observations gathered over months of careful attention. Together, they formed a picture neither could have completed alone. It was not a single person behind it. It was a network. Not criminal in the obvious sense, no theft, no violence, no overt coercion. But deliberate, coordinated, invisible unless one knew where to look. They're consolidating control, Caleb explained one evening. Not by force, but by structure. If they redirect enough routes, limit enough access points, independent landowners lose their value. And once the value is gone, Eliza said, the land becomes easy to acquire. Caleb did not answer. He did not need to. The realization did not frighten Eliza. It clarified her. For months, she had been responding, adjusting, compensating, enduring. Now, for the first time, she understood the shape of what she faced, and understanding changed everything. Their conversations grew longer, not personal at first, but precise. Eliza questioned assumptions, challenged conclusions, and refined strategies with a clarity that surprised even Caleb. She was not reacting emotionally to the pressure around her. She was analyzing it. "You've done this before," she said one evening, her tone measured. Caleb did not look up from the map. "Yes. For them?" she asked, a pause, then quietly, "Yes." The answer did not carry pride, nor regret, just truth. Eliza absorbed it without visible reaction. "And now?" she asked. Caleb finally met her gaze. "Now I don't," he said. It was not an explanation. It was a boundary. And for reasons she did not fully articulate, Eliza accepted it. As days turned into weeks, something shifted between them, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. Trust, in its simplest form, began to take shape, not through declarations, but through consistency. Caleb did not overstep. Eliza did not withdraw. Each respected the other's space, even as their purposes aligned. They were not dependent. They were synchronized. The turning point came not from Caleb, but from Daniel, or rather, from what he had left behind. Eliza had reviewed her husband's records many times before. But now, with new understanding, she saw something she had previously overlooked. A pattern within his maps, not markings of ownership, but of intention. He had not merely recorded the land, he had positioned it: trade routes, water access, distance to emerging settlements. All aligned in a way that suggested foresight far beyond ordinary ranch planning. Daniel had known, not everything, but enough. "He saw it coming," Eliza said quietly, her fingers resting on the edge of the map. Caleb stepped closer, examining the markings. "Yes," he said, "he did." Eliza exhaled slowly. "Then this was never just about holding the land," she said. "It was about what the land would become." Caleb did not disagree. "And now," he added, "they're trying to claim that future before it arrives." The weight of that realization settled heavily, but not hopelessly. If the land's value was tied to the future, then the future was still undecided. Eliza straightened, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly. For the first time since Caleb's arrival, her focus moved from understanding to action. "They're relying on isolation," she said, "on the assumption that each landowner will face this alone." Caleb watched her carefully. "Yes, then that's where they're wrong." A quiet determination entered her voice, not forceful, not emotional, but absolute. Caleb tilted his head slightly. "What are you proposing?" Eliza met his gaze, steady and clear. "We stop reacting to what they're doing," she said, "and start changing what they expect." Caleb studied her for a long moment, not questioning, evaluating. Then slowly he nodded. "Good," he said. That night neither of them returned to the maps immediately. Instead, they stood outside beneath the open sky, the land stretching wide and silent around them. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt shifting. For weeks, they had uncovered the hidden design imposed upon the land. Now, for the first time, they were ready to create one of their own. What neither of them said aloud, but both understood, was this: the outcome would not be decided by strength, nor by confrontation, but by who understood the system better and who was willing to change it. In the distance, the horizon remained unchanged, but beneath it something had already begun to move, quietly, deliberately. Inevitably, change, Eliza had learned, did not always arrive with noise. More often it arrived unnoticed, until it could no longer be undone. The days that followed her decision were not marked by urgency, but by intention. There were no sudden moves, no visible shifts that might draw attention. Instead, Eliza began with something far simpler and far more difficult. She reached outward. For months, perhaps longer, the surrounding landowners had lived as she had, quietly, separately, each managing their own struggles without connection. Distance had shaped their habits. Independence had defined their survival. And that, Eliza now understood, had been the very weakness others relied upon. So she began writing. Not formal letters of trade, nor guarded requests for cooperation, but clear, direct invitations. She did not accuse, she did not warn, she simply offered something different, a shared approach, a way to move goods collectively, to exchange information openly, to align routes instead of competing for them. At first there was silence, then hesitation, and finally response. It began with one neighboring rancher, cautious but curious, then another. Conversations followed, not in crowded rooms or formal gatherings, but in small exchanges, carried across distance by trust that had to be rebuilt from nothing. Caleb observed it all without interference. "You're changing the structure," he said one evening. Eliza nodded. "They expect us to remain separate," she replied. "So we won't." The shift was gradual but undeniable. Where once routes had been redirected quietly, now they began to realign, not toward a single property, but toward a shared network. Goods moved differently. Information traveled faster. Decisions were no longer made in isolation. And with each small change, the unseen pressure that had once surrounded Eliza's land began to lose its precision, because it could no longer predict her. The syndicate, though never named, never seen directly, responded in the only way it could. It hesitated, not out of fear but uncertainty. Their influence depended on control, on patterns that could be shaped, adjusted, and anticipated. But Eliza's approach disrupted those patterns without confronting them directly. There was no action to oppose, no move to counter, only a system that no longer functioned as expected. "They can't push against this," Caleb said quietly. Not without revealing themselves. Eliza closed her ledger, her expression calm. "And they won't," she replied, "because exposure would cost them more than this land is worth." For the first time in many months, the pressure eased, not completely, but enough. Enough for the land to breathe again. It was on a still afternoon, weeks later, that Caleb chose to speak. They stood near the edge of the property, where the land stretched outward toward territories that were no longer distant in purpose. "You should know something," he said. Eliza did not turn immediately. "I've been waiting for you to decide that," she replied. A faint, almost imperceptible shift crossed Caleb's expression. "I wasn't sent here by chance," he said. "Not exactly." Eliza faced him then, her gaze steady, unguarded. "I assumed as much." Caleb exhaled quietly. "I used to work with people who map land like this, who identify which properties will matter before anyone else realizes it." He paused. "Yours was on that list." Eliza listened without interruption. "I was meant to observe," he continued, "to confirm whether the land was worth repositioning further." The word carried weight now more than before. "And did you?" she asked. Caleb met her gaze fully. "No," he said. "I chose not to report." There was no apology in his voice, no attempt to justify, only truth. A silence followed, not tense, not fragile, but considered. Eliza stepped closer, her expression unchanged. "You stayed," she said. "Yes, you helped." "Yes." Another pause, then quietly, "That is the only part that matters now." Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, as though confirming something unspoken. Then he nodded. What had formed between them was not sudden nor dramatic. It had not been born from rescue or dependency. It had grown from understanding, from shared thought, from the rare recognition of one mind meeting another without resistance. The land changed slowly but surely, not in appearance, but in meaning. Where it had once stood as a solitary claim, it now functioned as a point of connection. Trade moved through it, not around it. Conversations passed across it, not in isolation. Decisions extended beyond it, not confined within it. Eliza Hartwell was no longer seen as a widow holding onto something fading. She was seen as something far less expected, a leader who had redefined what ownership meant. One evening, as the light stretched long across the horizon, Eliza stood once more on the veranda. The same place she had stood countless times before, but the silence had changed. It was no longer heavy, no longer watchful. It carried movement now, distant wagons, shifting routes, voices that no longer felt removed. Caleb stepped beside her, his presence steady, familiar. "You've changed it," he said. Eliza shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "I understood it. A small distinction, but an important one." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The land stretched before them, vast as ever, unchanged in form, yet entirely different in meaning. Will you stay? Eliza asked, her voice calm, without expectation. Caleb did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked outward as he had the first day, measuring distance, considering direction. But this time the decision did not seem distant. I will, he said, not as a promise, not as a favor, but as a choice. Eliza allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Not for him, not for the moment, but for what it represented. She was no longer holding the land alone, not because she needed someone to carry it for her, but because she had chosen to let someone stand beside her. As the sun lowered and the horizon softened, the story of the Hartwell Ranch settled into something new. Not a tale of survival, not a story of resistance, but of quiet transformation, of a woman who had been expected to fade into the distance and instead reshaped the distance itself. The land did not speak, but now it answered, and it no longer answered to silence.